Hello and welcome to AP World History. Today we are going to just introduce what world history is, what we're going to be learning about this year, why we learn history, and what AP World History is all about. Okay, so first off, I want you to define the word ignorance. Just take a minute here, pause the video, and come up with a definition of the word ignorance. Okay, once you do that, this is basically what it means. It's a lack of knowledge, information, and wisdom. Notice it's not the same thing as stupidity, which is where maybe you can't learn. Ignorance is maybe that you won't learn or that you have not learned. Okay, so it's that lack of knowledge, information, and wisdom. And this can cause a lot of problems, all right? When you ask someone what's the number one problem in the world today or in America today, they're likely to say things like poverty, racism, drug abuse, violence, and those are all huge problems in the world, to be sure. But I believe that the root of all of these problems is ignorance, and that's why I believe ignorance is the number one problem in the world today. It's the root of these problems, okay? And that's really why I became a teacher, to fight ignorance and to do my best at that. So that's why we learn in general. That's why we spend 8 hours in school every day in order to fight ignorance and to pursue wisdom in order to solve these problems in our lives and in the lives of others. But what about history specifically? Why do we have to study history? Why are 4 years of history required for you to graduate from high school? Well, there are several reasons why we study history. The classic answer, which is a good answer, is to learn from the past so we do not make the same mistakes as people before us, all right? Have you ever heard someone say, I had to learn that lesson the hard way? Okay, they're not usually talking about, oh, I had to take a test in school and it was really hard. No, they mean they had to learn it in real life, okay, in the workforce, in the world, and it's a lot more difficult to learn lessons that way than here in class. So no matter how hard this class is for you, I guarantee you it is easier than learning these lessons you're going to learn the hard way, okay? Another reason why we study history is to appreciate what we have and where our ancestors came from. That kind of appreciation, that gratitude for what the people who came before us did for us, that allows us to live the kind of lives that we live today. We also study history in order to honor the memory of those who came before us. Okay? A lot of us want to accomplish great things in our lives, but we don't want to be forgotten about that when we die, and we certainly don't want the great things we did to just disappear. So to honor the memory of those who came before us. And then finally, we study history to better understand who we are, where we come from, and it helps us better make sense of the world today. Life just makes so much more sense when you understand history. So what is history? It's the history, it's the study of people, places, and events that happened in the past. And just as importantly, it's also the study about how people have interpreted events in the past and what it means to us today. A lot of times the way people interpret events of the past is just as important as the events themselves, all right? Because it's how we make our decisions, how we choose to act based on how we interpret events of the past. So we learn what has happened in the past mostly through two sources, through documents and artifacts, those two categories of sources. A document is a written source, and an artifact is a physical object. All right, and usually the more recent things have happened, the more we know about them. Also, documents tend to be more specific, and we can learn more from those than artifacts usually. With artifacts, there's a lot more broad, vague interpretation that goes into them, and the reason we know more about things that have happened in recent centuries is because there are more documents. Some terms to know before we get started. BC. You probably heard BC before. It stands for before Christ. Years that happened before the birth of Jesus Christ are referred to as the number of years BC. So for example, the year 300 BC, that's about 2,300 years ago, that was 300 years before the birth of Christ. And then you have the term AD. A lot of people think that means after death. It does not. It means Anno Domini. That's Latin for the year of our Lord. Okay, so these are the years that happened after the birth of Jesus and are still happening now. So for example, 2018 AD, or right now, 2020 AD. So which year happened first, 1000 BC or 2000 BC? Take a second here, figure that out. Okay, the answer is 2000 BC. All right, because it is a higher number, if it happened in BC, that means it was longer ago. Okay, larger numbers in AD means it happened more recently. Okay, so just brief timeline here, just so you know what years kind of look like. Okay, you got 4000 BC, then 2000 BC. All right, the years get smaller, 500 BC. Then you have the birth of Christ, and then every year has gotten larger until the present day, 2020 AD. Other terms to know. Okay. Another term for BC is BCE, which means before the Common Era. You could say that's the more politically correct way of saying it. Some people don't want to reference Jesus Christ because he's a religious figure, so they say before the Common Era or BCE. And then the interchangeable term for AD is CE, which means the Common Era. Okay. You can talk about years either way. All right, personally, I say BC and AD. That's the more traditional way. But on the AP test, the terms BCE and CE will be used. So just make sure you know that those terms are interchangeable. Other terms to know, a decade. A decade is a time period of 10 years. All right, so for example, the 2020s is the decade we are in right now. You have like the 1980s was a decade, the 1960s was a decade, a period of time of 10 years. A century is a time period of 100 years, and a millennium is a time period of 1,000 years. Now, centuries are a little tricky, but it's really important that you understand this so you can answer questions correctly on the test and know what I'm talking about when I'm teaching. So for example, what century AD are we in right now? Most of you probably know we are in the 21st century. But wait a minute, it's 2020, not 2120. All right, so why are we in the 21st century? Well, the century number is always one number higher than the first two numbers of a year in that century. Okay, so for example, 1992, the year I was born, was in the 20th century, not the 19th century. And let me explain why this is. The first 100 years after Jesus' birth is the first century AD. But these were the years 1 through 99 AD. Therefore, the years 100 through 199, the 100s, was not the first century, it was the second century. All right, so whenever you hear things like the 17th century, all right, make sure you know that that's the 1600s, not the 1700s. Final slide here. What we will study in this class. Well, in 2019, the College Board changed the AP World History exam. Instead of covering the past several thousands of years, like from the ancients to now, this exam is only going to cover the past 800 years. It's only going to cover the years 1200 to the present. And that's also what your textbook covers. So over the first 2 weeks of this class, we're going to learn what I call pre-modern history, history before 1200, just to give you that foundation so we can dive into 1200 with some knowledge. We will have a test on this. And then for the rest of the year, starting probably in late August or early September, through the rest of the year, we will be in the textbook and learn the material that will be on the exam. And that's 1200 to the present. So make sure you get the textbook at least by that time, by the end of the month of August. We will get all the way to the present day. By the start of May, we will get to 2020, or in that case, 2021. And your AP exam will be on May 10th. All right, let me know if you have any questions.